Hello and welcome to Reps to GOG. Today we have Hakik. He is a composer who made music for video games such as FantaVision, Tomba 2, Sly Cooper, and Crash Nitro Kart. How are you doing today, Ash?
I'm doing good, man. I'm doing good, Joey. Thanks for asking.
That's good to hear. Since my project is mostly involved with PS2 games, I was wondering if you had like a favorite PS2 game. Do you play games at all?
Oh yeah, I mean, I used to play games a lot. I took some time out for a little bit, maybe around PS3 era, just because I got kind of burnt out on everything. I was in the video game industry. I started when I was 14, so I was in it for a long, long time, and I just like I said, I got burnt out. But PS2 era stuff, man, I don't know, man. I mean, I was a big fan of Silent Hill games, and you know what? It'd probably be Metal Gear. I mean, Metal Gear Solid, what was it, 2? That's probably one of my favorites, man.
No, Metal Gear Solid 2. I love that game. It's a classic. But
Yeah, yeah.
Silent Hill is great as well. I actually saw you. You proposed to. I don't know on Silent Hill 2, but I saw a Silent Hill game. You proposed music for that.
Yeah, yeah. I pitched on one of the, I think it was a PSP game or one of the mobile versions of Silent Hill. I forget what it was called, but yeah, I pitched on it ages ago. I took a couple of days. I had a friend working at Konami. I had two friends. Somebody I used to date was working there a long time ago, and she put me in touch with one of the producers that was working on it, and I pitched on it, and I didn't get the game, but it was a lot of fun. I think I just took like 2 days just to throw a couple of tracks together, like 4 tracks. But yeah, it was a little bit of fun.
Yeah, so I mean, I'd like to start kind of at the beginning. I mean, how did you get started doing for music video for games? I mean, 14 sounds really young for something like that.
Yeah, I started. Let's see, 14. I started doing focus group stuff mostly, and then I started getting called in quite a lot to Capcom and Namco when they were doing things for Genesis and just starting out on Genesis games, maybe a little Genesis. Let's say Genesis had been out for a little bit, but then when I was 15 or 16, I started working at Galoob Toys. They made the Game Genie ages ago. It's I don't know if you're familiar with it at all. It was a, cartridge based like middleman that you put your cartridge into the genie, and then you put the genie and the cartridge into your console, and you could put in codes to cheat on games and things like that. And I was there, I don't know, for about 6 years working on creating codes for the game genies, all the variants of them, and testing them, and just getting into testing video games. So that's where I started out in video games, and I was doing this in high school. It was pretty cool. You get out of school and get out of school early and go play video games for most of the day, get paid for it. Um, so it was that's how it started. And then when I was 19, see, I started playing guitar when I was 16 too. So right about the same time I started working there, I started playing guitar. And then when I was 19. I started working as a recording engineer at a local studio. I picked up music pretty quickly, and I started playing in a lot of bands, and a lot of people started doing demo CDs or demo tapes. And I started working at or going to different studios, and I started becoming this kind of like hired gun to play a guitar on a few records or a few demos. And I met a few studio owners, and I just asked if I could intern. And yeah, I did one when I was 18. I was playing in this band called Culture Threat, and I asked the studio owner, he needed an intern, and he was into it. He just started a studio maybe about a year before we were doing that, and he was way into it, and I was really young, so it was going to be something that I could really pick up, and just kind of he could teach me a lot. And he was just way into it, and within a few months he had me running smaller sessions, and next thing you know, I'm testing video games during the day, and I'm working at a recording studio at night, playing in bands, and it was kind of crazy. I was really busy, but that's how the music aspect of things started with my life. And I always felt like if there was a way to merge the two things that I was doing, video games and music, that would be really cool. So I started playing with the idea of getting into doing music for video games. I think, maybe when I was 20 or 21, it had to be somewhere around there. When I was 20 or 21, I gave a demo CD to Tommy Tallarico, or demo tape, at like CES back then, and it just it just included just me and a couple of guys from some of the bands that I played in, and mostly just jamming out on some ideas, some rock ideas and some big spacious sounds and stuff like that. But I was just trying to break in any way I could, and it didn't really get me anywhere. Tommy remembered me though. We became acquaintances through that, before Gang and all that started up. The Game Audio Network Guild. I don't know if you're familiar with that at all.
No, I'm actually not.
Yeah, there's a network guild that for audio guys, composers and sound designers and stuff. They started that. I forget how long ago. Probably about 20 years ago now. Anyhow, that's kind of how it all started. I mean, when I was 19, I was busy, man. I also started as a journo in doing articles in video game press, and working as an assistant editor on a nationally published magazine called New Type. I know there's New Type from overseas, but this was an American version that somebody started up, and we were like nationally published all in Barnes and Nobles and things like that. So it was I had my hands in a lot of pockets, but it was all surrounding, the want to be in video games or being in entertainment all together, But yes, what happened was I left Galoob and I started making sounds for toys for a little bit, while being an engineer at the recording studio. And then I said, this is fun and all, but it's really slow, and it's not exactly what I want to be doing. So I figured I'd go work at Sony. See, I'd gotten an offer to work at Sony while I was at Galoob, and I didn't take it. I had a bunch of friends of mine, or co-workers at Galoob. They all left. I was the last man standing for the Game Genie stuff, and they went to Sony to work, and I didn't take it, but I ended up going there years later specifically just to get in and do some lateral movement, to get into the audio department or start doing music for video games. And I ended up just going to test at 989 Studios. And one day somebody pissed me off so much. They just upset me. You have one of those guys that you work with that is one of those guys who just pushes buttons of everybody in the office. And he upset me so much that I just started cold calling producers from one of the internal phone lines, and cold emailing people, leaving messages and cold emailing, because I knew how the email structure worked for all the producers and stuff. And I just started leaving messages and saying I was interested in making music for video games. And I left a little bit of history of how long I've been working in the recording arts and stuff. And I started getting callbacks and emails, and I think one of them was to pitch on Bloody Roar, which I think I put a demo of that on my SoundCloud. But from something I pitched, just to do a title. I didn't get that, but then I got a call back from one of the assistant producers where they were localizing Tomba 2, and he called me and he says, "Can you do calypso music?" And I remember I was in the room. There's maybe about 5 or 6 guys, and I said, "Yeah, that's no problem. I could do that." He said, "Oh, yeah, then put together a demo, and within a couple of days, and get it to us, and we'll see what we can do. We'll see if it works out." And I hung up the phone, and I remember, because I didn't know, I wasn't that familiar with different genres of music, and I remember hanging up the phone, and I just go, "Hey guys, what's calypso music?" It was great because I had, I didn't even look at the guys. I just kind of set it out into the room, and then they informed me, and I was like, "Oh, okay, I get it. Yeah, I know what that is." And then I went home and I put together a small demo for Tomba 2, and they liked it well enough that they asked me to come, bid on the game. And I bid on it, and I undercut everybody by half. I had no idea, because I didn't think I was worth that much. I had no titles behind anything, and They were all into it. It was cheap to get me into it, and they had me do the game, and I ended up doing Tomba too. And that's how it started. So yeah, I mean it was pretty neat, man. You know, it's kind of like that's exactly what I wanted to do, was just get in and get connected, and it worked out for me.
You did that. So you were working for Sony, just in like you just like specifically had a job. It wasn't like a freelance gig or anything like that. You just were straight up working for Sony of America, I assume.
It was 989 Studios. Yeah, I'd I guess I was probably around 24, and what had happened is, as I said, I left Galoob and to focus on just working at the recording studio and focusing on trying to get better at different facets of the recording arts. And as I said, I started doing sounds for toys and things like that. And uh, it, it when I took maybe about a year and a half off, maybe 2 years to do that. And I guess I was about 22 or 23 when I do that. So 24, 25, I started working at Sony. It wasn't paying the bills, to do small gigs. So, and I didn't want to go anywhere else. I wanted to stay in the video game industry. So I just started working at Sony, and they have two test departments, or they used to have two test departments. They had what was called first party test and third party test, and one was focused at 989 Studios, and one was focused at Sony Computer Entertainment of America. And I went into 99 because they had an opening, and it would also put me in touch with some of the different departments of development. So.
Okay, cool. So let's go ahead and fast forward to FantaVision. I mean, tell me how that came about. What went on with that?
FantaVision was really, really weird. Well, not weird, but it's pretty interesting. That whole score I did in 12 days. I had to do, it's just insane because I wrote over an hour worth of music, and it was because there was rejected cues and things like that too. You got to find out what's working and then finish things. But yeah, it came from them wanting to localize the music. The music they had in Japan, they just weren't thinking it was right for the American audiences, and they showed me a couple of things that they were interested in trying to approach. Things like Enya and other things. It was really interesting. Some of the ideas that they wanted. They were really into something else that another one of the assistant producers had brought to them, and they were really into this kind of like airier sound. And so I pitched on it, and I honestly forget what I pitched. I just put together a couple of different things, and they were into it. And I got the gig real quick because they knew they had to get it done really quick, and they knew that they could count on me to get it done. So, yeah, but like I said, I mean, I think everything was finalized with masters and everything in maybe about 15 days total. So that's just an incredibly quick turnaround. I've never done anything that fast before. I was up for 20 hours sometimes. Not sometimes. Most of the couple of weeks, just finishing things, waking up, going back to sleep, and waking up and just working on music.
And was that like a deadline they gave you, or was that just like your drive to work on it?
No, that was the deadline they gave me.
Yeah.
That was it. They said this has got to be done in 2 weeks. That's just how it's got to be done. It was. I'm not sure if it was a last minute decision, but things were just happening. It was a launch title, so they had to have things together for what was going on, for presentations and things like that. So they were really, really just hustling on that. And I don't know the reasoning behind why they wanted to localize and ultimately localizing the different regions. Like the EU version has a completely different soundtrack, the Japanese version has a completely different soundtrack, and the American one has a completely different soundtrack. And I'm not sure the reasoning behind it. It just ended up that way. I think they felt that the different regions just needed different music, and they didn't want to pay licensing to get popular artists in. So they just wanted to hire people to do the music.
Do you think that that amount of like crunchiness affects the quality of the work at all?
Oh, for sure, man. I mean, you're putting things together. There's a bunch of stuff that I would have played with more harmony and maybe thickened out some of the arrangements a little bit, but you're just kind of going through it and putting things to tape and then finding out how it works. The other thing is one of the things that I did that I'm not sure that the other composers did is if you look at the game, the backgrounds in the game are pre-scripted. Obviously, there's all this stuff happening in the background, but the camera pans over things in a way that's always going to be the same way. I mean, you can pause the game but if you just let the background play, it's going to be exactly the same every time. And if you listen to the music, you can see that I semi scored it. Like all the things that happen on screen go in time with what I try to do with the music, or rather, all the changes in the music happen, to go along with visuals on the screen. So it's I kind of approached it like animation score, but more rhythmically based and something laid back.
That's actually really interesting because when my friend was watching me play it, and he's like, "Is this a rhythm game?" And I'm like, "No, it's a puzzle game." So yeah. I mean, I think you achieved something there. Do you speaking on that, I was curious about what goes into like crafting a sound that fits the motif of a level, because like you got like the city, you got like this the asteroid area, you got the wormhole, like how do you go about making music that fits that and isn't like discordant with the themes of like any given level?
Well, during that time, there was one of the producers over at Sony who works with Naughty Dog. I mean, I think he's producer on Last of Us now. Him and I were good friends. We both worked at Sony at the same time, and him and I, we were both into this band called On. It's ON. It's a producer by the name of Ken Andrews. He was in a band called Failure, but he had this electronic band that was just him. And we were both really into his record when it came out. So you'll find a bunch of influences, especially I think I can't remember which what the name of the track. Let me pull them up here. I think it was. Might be was it the Lunar City? It might be Snow on the Moon. Yeah, okay. So Snow on the Moon, the Stage 6 one. It's really influenced by that band. And so that kind of drove me towards more electronic and rhythmic, stuff. It's funny because I also kind of went that way with Sly because of Get Shorty. We were kind of trying to look at that. And plus the late 90s and early 2000s still had that influence from a lot of rhythmic stuff, a lot of loops and break beats and things like that. But what I just went for was just to kind of watch the stage. I watched it on mute and just tried to get a vibe for what was going on. I mean, like the City of Lights, I obviously went for a Rhapsody in Blue kind of influence. I wish I, had better samples during the time or could have hired a bunch of live players, but I didn't have the resources for something like that back then. It's just taking the visuals and seeing what they bring to it. I mean, like, the Shooting Star was one, kind of got a little bit rock drums because I felt like I could build the kind of trail of the comet into something that was really full of energy and things like that. So, like I said, it's just really just watching it and kind of vibing out to it.
Okay. Yeah, that's cool. Would you call yourself self-taught or?
Oh yeah. Everything I learned was self-taught. I tried to take guitar lessons, and I lasted about 2 weeks, and I couldn't do Jimmy Crack Corn. It just wasn't doing it for me. So I spent a lot of time learning music. Really, everything was by ear back then. I wasn't really theory heavy, but I understood, some of the basics of harmony. I mean, a lot of it's pop harmony back then. But because I came at it from a rock background, you get a lot of classical influence. So My ear for harmony was a bit varied. It wasn't great with jazz harmonies and wider voicings and really arranging with more instruments. That I had to learn when I was on Sly. It took a lot of work to really understand that a little bit more. But here it was, you find a vibe, you realize you're going to go with more rhythmic stuff, and you're going to kind of do a lot of loops. Like I said, they were into Enya and things like that, and really kind of going for mellow loops or something that wouldn't distract too much. So you find that, and you start just kind of vibing out, jamming out, playing ideas, playing some on the guitar, playing some on the piano or the keyboard, and just kind of feeling out what works for things.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Great. So I mean, you mentioned Sly. Do you want to talk about your time working on Sly as well?
Well, Sly was a lot of fun. It was a pretty long game. I think I worked on it for 7 months or something like that. Um, it took it took a lot of work. I mean, what I'd done is I actually pitched on Jack and Daxter. It was called Project Y back then, and I pitched on that, and I didn't get it because they ended up going with Music Mutato or Mutato Music, and because they were familiar with them, but they were into what I was doing, so they offered me Sly. They said, since you really understand what we're trying to do with the interactive engine, and you understand what these transitions are supposed to be about. Why don't you take a shot at Sly? And so I did a bunch of pitches for Sly, and they were into it. And then I had to learn what was called the adaptive MIDI engine, or the adaptive music engine. It was the AME, built by this guy named Buzz Burrows. I think he works at Harmonix now, and doing a bunch of rhythm games and music stuff. But he built this interactive MIDI engine where it's all scripted, where if certain excitement levels trigger certain MIDI events and then different flows of the music. And it was pretty flexible. You could do layers, which a lot of people do these days, but you could do also changes where an event would happen and the music would change either drastically or whatever you wanted to do. You could do transpositions, you could do tempo changes, you could do quite a bit. I was having trouble doing triplets, which is problematic because I wanted to do swing, but I was just not getting too much. It was chopping too much. I had to kind of keep straight rhythms. But anyhow, I had to learn the scripting. I had to build the samples, the small, because all internal samples, I couldn't use CD music, and compose all at the same time. It was the work of three people. I mean, I know on Jack and Daxter, they had multiple people working on it, not just the music, but the people doing the sound, the design of the samples, and the scripting. All of that was done by different people. I had to sit there and just hustle through doing the work of three people in one game. So yeah, it was a lot of work, but it was really rewarding because it was a lot of fun, man.
Yeah, no, it sounds cool. I mean, and this was like, I mean, a lot of the stuff you've worked on has Sony's name. Do you think that like your your time with them helped you get these gigs that I don't know if you'd call them gigs, but helped you get these pitches accepted, or do you think that it was like,
Part of it's that. Part of it is feeling comfortable with the group. The other issue, I mean, the other part was that um, it's just, I mean, I was cheap during the time, and budgets were a big thing, and I wasn't doing AAA games until Sly came around. So when you're doing localization, you're trying to make sure that you're not, breaking the bank to do this. So that was part of it. Ultimately, my rates went to normalized rates, within the industry. It wasn't like I was always doing things for half the price. It was just my first game. I didn't really feel like I was worth that much, or whether I could ask for that much. Um, but yeah, I mean, part of it is the comfortability of people that you work with. You want to be able to have that repertoire with them, so you're not feeling like they know more or you know more or somebody's talking over somebody. It felt really mutual and giving in both, in the working relationships.
Yeah, I'm sure in any sort of like team environment, there has to be an amount of meshing that happens.
For sure, you got to find something that, people that you vibe with, that works, and the industry was still, I mean, it was big, but it was still small within, especially with music. There was, the TV guys weren't really. They were still working in TV. They were looking to break into films more than they were looking to break into video games. And I think right around that time, in the mid 2000s, TV guys started to come into video games. They were finding that there was work there, and they were interested in it because it was all CD streaming now, and they had a lot more. Not only that, it was all DVDs, so they could just really work with lots of music and be really flexible. So the kind of environment started to change, and it got a little saturated. There was a lot more composers doing more video game work rather than what it was before.
Yeah, every time I read an interview, because I do actually like read a lot of interviews from people in the industry, is like anytime it's a composer talking about the move from the PS1 to the PS2, they're just like, I was just so amazed at how much I could fit on that disc, how much space I was given to work
Yeah,
with.
yeah. I mean, see on Tomba 2, the localizations were, I think they were like 90-minute cues, or I mean 90-second cues, and I couldn't really stray from the length that was already there because they wanted to keep it about the same length for every replacement cue. So I was kind of, in a straitjacket. I was kind of restricted to what I could do in that game. And then FantaVision was a bit of the same thing because the stages, had a certain length. So it was neat with Sly that I could do a lot more, but then all of a sudden all that CD and DVD space that I could do real live music with and do whatever kind of arrangements I couldn't do anymore because everything had to go MIDI. It was so frustrating, but it was still a joy to work with because you learn a lot when you put yourself or set yourself with limitations. You really push yourself a lot harder. Maybe it doesn't result into what people expect because of certain technologies, but when you look at what goes into the project itself, as I said with FantaVision, I kind of tried to score the backgrounds, and if you really look at it that way, there's an interesting aspect of it that goes under the radar, and with Sly, the adaptive MIDI engine, and then all the sampling and all the creation all the process that goes into to creating the way that game's music plays is really, really deep. I mean, it got nominated for an Audio Network Guild award. It was pretty cool. I was pretty proud of that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Do you? You mentioned a lot of the movie and like TV producers. I'm kind of interested in hearing about like the differences between producing movie or I mean music for like a video game versus producing music for like a band because you said you were in that, and then also like for like TV and movie. Like what kind of like what kind of key differences would you say there are between like doing those things?
Well, after video games, I started moving into doing orchestration for local bands and arrangements and things like that, and then some big bands too. I'm not too proud of the end results on because the projects kind of floundered. As I was working on them, budgets ended up getting cut, and we didn't get live musicians and things like that. But I ended up working. I started doing editing for building tools like orchestral libraries for film and TV composers. So I ended up talking to a lot of film and TV guys. I'm good friends with Thomas Burgesson from Two Steps from Hell. Him and I, we used to do sampling together a while back and build a bunch of these orchestral tools or orchestral sampling tools for us to work with. And it's an interesting thing when you talk to the different ways people compose. Video games and TV are similar in the regards that you create a lot of music that gets rejected until you're into a flow and people trust what you're doing. And once you start getting into that to where you have a certain sound or a certain flow that, in TV, it can be different with directors coming in every episode. But in general, there's a trust on what the show's quote unquote supposed to sound like. Sometimes you get to experiment and do different things, but it has an identity. But you still get things that have to change, and you have to kind of hustle and get things done, and change them up for whatever people are asking for. The key differences are or used to be, at least with video games, is that the music was very static. It would have to be something that would go on repeat, that wouldn't be too obnoxious or too in your face, and that's something I had to learn the hard way. It was still something that I figured out after a while, but it took some getting used to understand. With television, you're scoring the picture, and usually the picture comes to you when it's locked, and so you're okay. You don't have to worry about things changing. But every once in a while, something will change, and you have to. All of a sudden, it's a small little move makes everything drastic. Your groove of a 4/4 or a 5/4 feel all of a sudden has to change at a certain spot. So you have to really attenuate or change certain aspects so that the feel feels correct when you're doing hits or accents, like that. But a lot of it's really similar in the regards that right around the time in the early 2000s, a software called Giga Studio came out, and software sampling became a really big thing. Before that, you had hardware samplers that had very limited RAM. I mean, we're talking megabytes worth of RAM. And then ultimately, maybe only a few gigabytes, 4 gigabytes of RAM being limits. And you just ended up not being able to do these large, giant libraries of that stream off a hard drive, just 2 gigabytes for a piano, hundreds of gigabytes for strings and whatever. And I think right around the time Garrett and strings had just started showing up, and people were experimenting with doing more larger orchestrations that sounded more like what you could hear in films. And so a lot of people in TV and video games started using that, and it started to change the landscape. People could compete with what you were hearing in Media Ventures or Hans Zimmer scores and things like that. So it was pretty deal. It was pretty interesting.
Do you want to talk about Crash Nitro Kart at all?
Nitro Kart. Yeah, that ended up coming in from Vicarious Visions. They were doing Universal, and or they were doing the gig for Universal or through Universal, and I don't know what made them look towards. Because they had an internal sound guy, or they had a guy doing music, and he was doing sound and everything. It was Todd. I think he was doing, because he already had started with stuff, but I'm not sure if there was just there was a lot of music and they were looking for somebody else to help out, or how it came about. But they reached out to me, and I was just going through right before we started talking. I was going through one of the old archive discs, and I was kind of looking at how it started out, and there was a couple of demos. I remember I did the demo in a day, and I pitched on it. I gave it to him that night. I think I wrote like 3 basic demo ideas, and the one that I really pitched ended up becoming the title song, and it barely changed. I mean, it really didn't change. The song is really the same. There is one version of it that I made that was a little bit different, but that's not the one I sent. The one I sent is what ended up becoming the title song. The only thing that's different is it's mixed a little bit differently. Yeah, I remember getting the call back, and they were just laughing because they loved it so much. It was a feel good moment, because I was really, I was in between gigs. I knew I'd have a gig coming up, but I had a little bit of time in between, and I really wanted to fill it up with doing some music, and doing a game. And it just came in, and it was a lot of fun, because when I was working at Sony, Crash Bandicoot 2 was in for test. I don't think I worked on it, but all our, in our little office and area, there was a bunch of people working on it. So it was nice to be able to work on a game that, and still be part of the family,
Yeah, no, that's cool. You mentioned Todd. That's Todd Maston, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Did you like work with him at all, or was it mostly like he did his own thing, you do your own thing?
No, I met Todd once. We had a meeting with I think the president or the CEO of Vicarious. At the time they were in the Bay Area, and we met up and we talked about what we were going to do. And I think ultimately we decided then that we were going to split the game. He'd do half the soundtrack and I do half the soundtrack, or in-game stuff, and I do all the cutscenes and he'd do all the mixing. Because then and any remixes that had to go on audio CDs and things like that, because he was going to be involved in the implementation process, especially cross platforms, and it was just a better idea to have him involved in that stuff and me just doing cutscenes. And it ended up working out. I mean, because each of the sections, the different environments, they had 3 tracks, I believe, and then a boss track, or maybe it was 3 tracks because the third one was the boss track, and you could set up a style and character for those regions. And that's what I went for, is I brought motifs in for each of the sections. Like the Western and some Western sections where I had a couple of melodies that I'd bring back. And then the futuristic sections, the technique stuff, I had the same thing. And I brought in the velo track for that. It ended up being really cool because we could both kind of come at it from that point of view, and have different things that would recur or different ideas that would center the tracks. But I think if you listen to it, I went way motif heavy and he went way more style and character heavy. And it's kind of neat because they're different and they still work. They none of them don't sound out of place or that they don't work together. And I think that's a testament to him balancing the mixes and getting everything to feel like it's in one game. I remember one of the issues that I have with it is that I didn't get to do any of the cutscenes. I had to do them in like 2 days. It's weird with cutscenes. Same thing happened in Sly. I had to do all of Sly's cutscenes except for the first one. I had to do all of Sly's cutscenes in I think a day and a half or 2 days. It was really, really quick. We had to get them all done. But the same thing happened on Crash Nitro Kart, that the cutscenes came in late and I had to do them. It was a really short amount of time. I don't think it might not have been a couple of days, but it was a very short amount of time. And it was at the end of the project. So I didn't really get to implement any of the character themes that I would, be able to develop in the cutscenes and bring them into the game, except for Velo, because it was one of the last tracks that I did. And I was able to take the Velo cuts, or the theme that I used in his cutscenes, and implement it into the last track. I used it as a motif, which I was pretty happy about. I was able to be using something or do something like that. I'm really big on that kind of influence from opera and classical music and film music, where you take leitmotifs and you bring them in and reuse them and just kind of create a character with the music.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense to me. I guess I'm gonna kind of start wrapping it up here,
Sure.
but I'm gonna give you a chance to talk about like what you're working on now, if you have any projects going on. But before that, I would like to know if I know you haven't worked in like video games for a while, or at least based on like your credits, it doesn't seem like it. And I was wondering if you had any like advice for anyone who would be like a young hopeful who is trying to make it into like music or video game music or anything in that regard.
Well, music, I mean, especially in the past decade or so, it's changed quite a lot. I mean, there's a lot of licensing houses now, so you can build tracks to spec and put them into licensing libraries, and they get used. They get needle dropped, or they get used into trailers or TV spots or advertisements online, or even on websites or whatever. Or live shows or live presentations and things like that. You'll get a lot of that as work if you can build up a library of your own stuff and start submitting them to library houses. I'm not sure anybody does unsolicited anymore, but if you start getting into the circles that do that, you can start putting them into libraries and get a chance to get licensed. Now it's pretty saturated, so you want to try and find yourself into more exclusive groups. But that's one way to go about it. But with video games, I think there's so many independent developers now, and the development process has been opened up to hobbyists that are really talented now, and just all types of creative artists that are doing new things. That I would say hang out in development forums and inundate yourself within these groups, just become part of these communities. That's one of the big aspects of any type of media creation or art creation, is groups of community and groups of artists coming together to create something. Find yourself talented people, not to ride their coattails on, but that inspire you and that push you and push you beyond what your limits are, so you learn more or you push harder. And in that you always learn more and you become a better artist. But in that you can always do that to other artists as well, and pushing each other makes your own collective art better. And with that you reach further, you find yourself finding further reaches, and you can always create better art, and that starts to get people to notice you, and you just it's a kind of self-fulfilling, and it's a feedback loop of positivity. And that's one of the things that you can only do with communities. So find yourself in a community that you can be a part of, and don't be afraid to jump in and just start creating. The tools are out there. There's so many amazing tools to make music with now. I mean, things like Reaper are very cheaper and available for artists to come in and learn. And that's an amazing digital audio workstation, and a bunch of sample libraries. That there's free sample libraries or very cheap ones, or there's articulations and sample collections that are was it the University of Ohio that has a bunch of samples that are articulations you can learn from, that people are turning into sample libraries. It's pretty amazing what's out there for people to create music. So there's options for you, but find communities that you can learn from, and you can get to push you to create. And that's the best way to get yourself out there and get not just lucky, but find yourself working on different varieties of projects, whether small or large.
Yeah. In a lot of ways, I feel like doing that is creating your own luck. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, one of the best things is it's just like playing in bands and different scenes in music. You find bands that you work with really well, and you start promoting yourselves within the same groups, and you find new fans, you find new venues to play at, and you start touring together. And then you do it again. You find other bands and other fans and other artists, and it just builds from there. It's the same thing within communities. I mean, some of these communities are just about talking and critiquing things, and that's not always where it's at. I mean, you can find yourself in a bit of a black hole of not negativity, but ownership of what something should be, and that's not really what it's about. That's one of the reasons I left forums. I used to hang out on a lot of these virtual instrument forums and creativity forums. No, not creativity forums, but these audio tool forums, and you find that a lot of people own what it should be, when all of us have an individual sense of style and character. I mean, sometimes there's regulations for certain things within audio, learning the regulations of what certain volumes should be, what formats you should submit in, things like that, and just such things like that. They're good to learn, but you can get into a place to where you're critiquing all the time, and you feel like something should be a certain way, and then you find a group of people. I mean, you take something like what's going on with Last of Us 2 right now. It's a lot of ownership on what the game should be, and it's the same thing can happen in certain communities. And what I mean about hanging out in communities are find developer communities where people are doing small projects and involve yourself in them. They might be, only a couple of weeks long, and they might be not, big and graphically impressive, but they might inspire you to try something different musically because they're doing something different with the mechanics of the game.
Yeah, I think a lot of those small devs are really good at that with the game jams and things like that, where they're just constantly like, let's get together, let's just put out like a thing that is like a proof of concept within a certain amount of time, and let's just make something together, and it's happening constantly.
For sure. That same thing used to happen in film, or short films or and whatnot. It's the same kind of idea and mentality, and it really works. It helps put you in the mindset of working, which is something that you really need to do, because sometimes creation or music creation can just be about, what do I feel? Do I feel like making this or not? And you just kind of sit around and noodle all the time. Working is a whole different kind of mentality, and it's a muscle you have to really work out.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, I think that's a very good answer. Do you, like I said, I was looking to wrap this up now. I'm very sweaty right now
Yeah.
because I've turned off all my fans and closed my windows because I want to
Okay.
make sure
Good,
the
good,
audio
good.
is good. And you know,
Some nice iced tea or something, man.
yes, I will be hydrating after this. But I'd like to give you an opportunity to talk about what you got going on in your life. If there's any projects you're working on that you'd like to get eyes on. If you have anyone that you would like to, anyone who you'd like to signal boost their things.
Right now I've taken some time off. Everything kind of my life hit a real hard spot a couple of years ago, and then a few years before that. So maybe for about a half a decade, things got really rough for me. So a couple of years ago, I stopped everything music. I haven't played guitar or sang or written anything of significance in about 2 years. And one of the reasons I started going through my archives is to start finding some of the raw data I did with a bunch of these sample library guys, and repair some of my guitars. And I'm going to start making some music again within, probably within this month, and just see how it goes. I want to get back into it to try and find a new mentality for it. I found myself, took time away from creating video game music to start playing live locally, because I found some a different kind of passion, and that took over for a long time. It was real good, but it was more my outlet for music for a long time. And now that I've kind of taken some time away from that, I'm feeling the itch to, and the bug to maybe write some orchestral pieces again, and get back into video games again. So you might see me hanging out in some of these forums and communities, just kind of hanging out and seeing how it goes.
Awesome. Do you have a place where people can check out your music or anything you're working on?
Nah, man, I'm just hoping that I can build it up and see if I can ride a wave again.
Okay, awesome. Well, yeah, I do thank you for taking time out of your day to talk to me about this. Um, I really appreciate getting perspectives on this that I can never have because I don't do like music or audio engineering or anything like that. So, it was very interesting for me.
Right on, man. Well, good luck with the 800, 1800 titles. And if you run across another game that I did and you find you want to ask some questions about that specific game, go ahead and hit me up again. I'll give you some insights or anything. But
Yeah,
yeah, I think you're going to be running a real long game here, man. So I'm interested to see where you hit the ball.
yeah, for sure. It's yes. Thank you. I
Good luck.
appreciate it.
Good luck with it. Maybe you'll surprise all of us and get through every one of them and just kind of keep going right into PS3.
Yes. Yeah. I don't even want to think about the end of this journey, but
Right on, man.
all right. You have
Good
a good
luck.
one, all right?
You too, man. Good talking to you. Take care.
Yep.